I was a seminary intern sitting in a small office in a church in South Central Los Angeles in the spring of 1968 when my phone rang. The voice said, "Hello, Jim, this is Melvin Wheatley speaking." He invited me to meet with him to talk about the possibility of my joining the staff of Westwood United Methodist Church as an associate pastor with responsibility for youth ministries. That was a beginning of what was not just to be my first pastoral appointment, but a lifelong friendship with Mel and Lucille and the entire Wheatley family. He was my mentor and my guide and became my colleague and my friend. There is no one else in the shaping of my life in ministry that even comes close in personal or professional importance, and my world will not be the same without him. There is no question that Bishop Wheatley's place in the history of the United Methodist Church and in the social history of our country will be dominated by his witness for the full inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender persons in all aspects of church and national life. But his unwavering belief in the expansive and inclusive love of God did not begin when he stood alone addressing the Council of Bishops in 1978. It did not begin with his appointment of Julian Rush in 1982. It was, as we've heard suggested already, deeply woven into the fabric of his life. Melvin Ernest Wheatley Jr. was born on May 7, 1915, in Louisville, Pennsylvania, the day, as he liked to point out, on which the Lusitania was sunk. He was the second of 5 children of Melvin Ernest Wheatley and Gertrude Mitchell Wheatley. He was the son and grandson of Methodist pastors. He graduated from high school in Middleton, Delaware, got his Bachelor of Arts degree magna cum laude from American University in Washington, D.C., and in 1939 graduated summa cum laude from Drew University School of Theology in Madison, New Jersey. He would later receive Doctor of Divinity degrees from American University and from the University of Pacific in Stockton. In 1939, Mel heard the bishop appoint him to not 1, but 3 pastoral charges he knew nothing about. His first appointment, as he said, was to Slaughterneck, Cedar Neck, and Lincoln, Delaware. That month, 70 years ago this June, Mel married Lucille Maris, and they headed off for that first pastoral assignment. After 3 years serving that 3-point charge, Mel and Lucille moved to Northern California. Associate pastor at Fresno first, pastor at Centenary Modesto, and then 8 years as pastor of Central Methodist Church in Stockton. During those Northern California years, their sons, Paul, Jim, and John, were born. Then in 1954, the family moved to Southern California as Mel began what would be an 18-year pastorate here at Westwood. That pastorate, as we have heard and know, came to a close in 1972 with his election to the episcopacy at the Western Jurisdictional Conference. In January of 1973, just months after his assignment as bishop of the Denver area, he delivered an Iliff sermon on a theme he had addressed in this pulpit the year before. Bishop Toole talked about his sermon titles, and that indeed was a hallmark. They always got you. But this one was titled, "Why Whole Religion is So Hard to Sell." He talked about the mutual demands of personal piety and social responsibility, the simultaneous challenges to probe deeply within and reach broadly beyond. And he observed that whole religion is hard to sell because there's something in it to offend almost everybody. He quoted one observer of the then ascending model for church growth who said, "The way to be successful in religion in these times is to give the public exactly what it wants, and about 10% more of it than it expects." To which Bishop Wheatley responded, But that is not Christianity's way of being useful. For Christianity is never satisfied with people who are satisfied with themselves. The very wholeness of the life which Christianity espouses is intended to stir up in all of us a sense of divine discomfort with the fragmentations in our lives. Mel's passion, again, as we've heard and know, was for wholeness in life and for that grace-filled life of the whole gospel. Again, as we all know and has been commented upon, one of the many memorable things about Mel was his skill in crafting language. And I'm reminded of the wonderful words of Mark Twain, who once said, "The difference between a good word and the perfect word is the difference between a lightning bug and lightning." Mel knew and cared for and crafted perfect words for significant times. We again heard from our bishops about Bishop Wheatley's stand in relation to the Council of Bishops and his insistence that his name not be carried on the statement affirming disciplinary language that said that the practice of homosexuality was incompatible with Christian teaching. But his words in objecting, he insisted not only that that his name not be included, but as he said, that it carried the unmistakable message that the vote that launched it was not unanimous. And history notes his action, but other parts of the statement which he delivered to the Council of Bishops in November of 1978 were also telling. He said, "Whenever I am asked to permit my name to be attached to any public pronouncement on homosexual persons, for that is what any such statement is, a pronouncement on real and particular persons, not a pronouncement on a subject without a face. I do not hear the meanings of that pronouncement transmitted through editorialized columns. I hear the meanings of that pronouncement transmitted through the eyes of, and then he named 4 very important and cherished persons in his and Lucille's lives, including their son John, whose life we celebrated in the sanctuary and memorial services in 1984. Mel believed in what he would call the power of the personal. His statement to his colleague bishops was an expression of that power. That humble, care-filled, but solitary witness was a loving and unbending commitment to human beings, to real people, an unwavering belief in the sacred worth of all of God's children. Mel not only wrote powerfully, but he found and recognized and used the words of others. Preaching in an era, may I say, before internet search engines did a lot of our work for us, Mel read extensively and brought insights from many disciplines to his preaching, writing, and ministry. And reflecting on the importance of integrity in one's actions, Mel and Lucille quoted the words of educator Bernardo Overstreet, who wrote, "You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I don't suppose I ever really thought they would, but I am prejudiced beyond debate. Which side shall feel the stubborn ounces of my weight?" Through that elemental commitment, Mel and Lucille changed our church and are helping to change the world. The key roles they have played in the formation and development of the national organization of PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, is just one of the ways in which they have invested time and effort to express their Christian faith as expansive, loving, and just. Bishop Swinson referred to Bishop Stewart's comments. Bishop Wheatley invited Marvin Stewart to speak on the occasion of his retirement in 1984. And Bishop Stewart spoke of Mel's witness and leadership and acknowledged the controversy that had often surrounded his actions. He said, "Mel is not a person fond of upheaval and notoriety. As one friend wrote to me, though I'm sure that temperamentally Mel would have loved to avoid conflict, for his is a spirit filled with healing, nonetheless, he would not sacrifice principle to do so. And that has been true throughout their lives. We heard reference to Bishop Sano's telling of the story of their occupying a home of a Japanese family during the time of relocation. In the 1950s, Mel and this church became pioneers in the first church-related mental health clinic, addressing mental health issues in a faith context for the first time. Rumford Fair Housing issues, very controversial and divisive, early opposition to the war in Vietnam. In the early 1970s, addressing and calling out the impending signs of the coming ecological crisis. It has been a pattern long embedded in a faithful ministry. Mel is survived by his wife of nearly 70 years, Lucille, by his son Jim, by his son Paul and Paul's wife Susan, by his grandchildren Ben and Chris and Carolyn, by 3 of his 4 siblings, sisters Ruth Smith and Mary DeMonte and brother Ira Wheatley, by nieces and nephews, by score upon score of pastors and parishioners, Episcopal colleagues, neighbors, friends, and children of God in all kinds of places whose lives have been touched and molded and changed by his presence. More than once, I heard Mel offer words of comfort to families and friends who had endured a personal loss and who faced the strange and unfamiliar landscape of a world in which one they loved no longer lived in familiar ways. More than once, I heard him end with the affirmation of a simple story about one of America's first presidents. It seems that one day in his 80th year, John Quincy Adams was walking down the streets of Boston when an acquaintance greeted him. "How is Mr. Adams today?" The former president replied, "Fine, thank you, fine. However, this old tenement he's been moving around in all these years is not so fine. The doors are beginning to creak on their hinges and the roof is about to cave in. In fact, I think Mr. Adams is going to have to move out pretty soon and find a new place to live. But John Quincy Adams himself is quite fine, thank you, quite fine." That faith was Mel's, and it is ours. That though he is no longer among us in familiar ways, Melvin Wheatley himself is quite fine, thank you, quite fine.